Gurmagat. Minister, when a combination of both.
Back and forth questions.
Combination of both. When I put a question to the Minister, I'll give him time to respond.
Great.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Ken Corlett. Minister, you had a phone call with the CMO on Sunday last, and I'm assuming that call wasn't about the sporting events that took place the day before. That call was about his very serious concerns about the spread of COVID and about his deep concerns about the contraction of the virus and the numbers right across the state. And for the first time, Minister, it has to be said, today in the Dáil, we're now learning that on that phone call, the CMO and you did have a discussion about added restrictions. What you say is that the CMO and you talked about the possibility of moving to level 4. That's the first time I've been made aware of that. I'm assuming it's the first time that people in this House have been made aware of that. Can I ask you, Minister, and if you can respond to this very briefly, when the CMO put it to you that he was so concerned that he may recommend going up a level or even more, was there any pushback from you? Did you say to him at that point that would be unacceptable, that would be problematic? Did he have any sense that that would be a difficulty or a challenge for government? Because I can tell you, Minister, that the impression that was given for 48 hours after that phone call was that NPHET had gone on a solo run and had bounced the government. And it looks, Minister, very clearly from your statement tonight that that was not the case. In fact, you go on to say that in your response to the CMO, you said that you asked that they stick to the parameters set out in the framework for each level. Your plan, Minister, and your framework allows for 5 levels. So my direct question to you is this. Did you, at any event, at any time in that call on Sunday morning, before the NPHET meeting, say to the CMO, when you talked about added restrictions, that that was going to be a big difficulty for government? And second of all, following that phone call on Sunday morning, did you inform the Taoiseach of that call? And did you inform the Taoiseach that in that call there was a discussion about added restrictions and the possibility that NPHET might in fact recommend going to level 4 or level 5? And I'll give you 1 minute to respond to that.
You can't decide what length of time the Minister is going to have. But anyway, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Cullinane. Can I just start by making the following point? The only person I've heard suggest that NPHET was going on a solo run is you, right now. I've never used that language. I don't know who has used that language. So the only person I've heard suggest this is you. It's the only time I've heard this language. I have not suggested, nor I think would it be proper for me to make such suggestions. NPHET was convened by the Chief Medical Officer on Sunday, as when he was away, the acting Chief Medical Officer, out of the normal cycle of NPHET meeting on Thursdays, had done from time to time. That's what the Chief Medical Officer did, and he is absolutely within his rights to do that. And indeed, if he chose to convene NPHET again this Saturday, or this Sunday, or this Monday, that would be his right. And nobody tries to influence when NPHET meet, other than the Chief Medical Officer and NPHET. I outlined in my statement, Deputy, what the Chief Medical Officer and I discussed. Did I try to influence the recommendations coming out of NPHET? Of course I didn't. I would have never done such a thing. NPHET's job is to provide the best public health advice they can to government. And whilst government ultimately, whilst agreeing to move up the levels and agreeing to implement various other recommendations NPHET came up with on Sunday, we didn't move to level 5, we moved to level 3. And we believe that that is the best option for the country. Thank you.
The problem you see here is that you admitted yourself that you didn't hear the interview with the Taoiseach and RTE, when the Taoiseach very, very clearly pushed back against the CMO and very, very clearly gave the impression that the government was bounced. And the first that they heard of added restrictions was when they had received a letter from the CMO to government and to you as Minister. And what you are telling the Dáil today is that on Sunday before NEFID met, that there was a discussion about going to level 4 and possibly further. And that, as you put it, you did not try and influence NEFID, which is right. But the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach were saying that they were caught on the hop, that the first they heard of it was when they received the letter after the meeting on Sunday. And that, Minister, is patently untrue. And the fact of the matter is that the CMO did everything possible, as far as I can see, by relaying the information to you as Minister for Health, by being very clear about the situation in terms of the spread of the virus, by talking to you about the possibility of added restrictions. And yet, the following day, on national television, you had the Taoiseach talked about being bounced. And today in this chamber, in response to my colleague, Deputy Doherty, he said he had no inkling until he got a briefing on after the NEFID meeting. He had no inkling about added restrictions. And that's clearly not the case. So what you didn't answer in your question that I put to you is that when you and the Chief Medical Officer had the discussion on Sunday morning prior to NEFID meeting, and you talked about added restrictions and the possibility of going to level 4, did you relay that at that point to the Taoiseach? And was that information given to the Taoiseach? And why was it, Minister, that when we had all of the controversy surrounding that interview that the Taoiseach gave on RTE, and the perception that NEFID went on a solo run, and the perception that NEFID had gone ahead of the government and had not briefed the government on what they were doing, you did not put into the public domain for 24 hours that you had these telephone calls with the Chief Medical Officer. And only today in the chamber we're hearing from you that indeed you did have a discussion about added restrictions. Now, Minister, I have to say that that is a failure on your part. That is a failure on your part. And there has been a fracture that has happened over the last number of days between government and public health officials because of the mishandling of the situation. And what I'll say to you is this, Minister. The poor communication that was talked about between government and between the Chief Medical Officer in NEFID, it strikes me was not the case. The poor communication was on the government side and between you and the Taoiseach and you and the Taoiseach and you and your partners in government. So again, can you answer the question I put to you? On Sunday morning, Minister, when you received that call and had a discussion about the added restrictions, there was a possibility coming from that NEFID meeting, did you have a conversation with the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach about that possibility?
Just before the Minister responds, to be clear, the Minister has a responsibility for who he spoke to, but the Minister cannot reasonably be expected to respond to the House in respect to who spoke to somebody else. We don't operate on the basis of Dort Ban Lunga, Dort Ban Lay. Minister, please.
Margaret, Cian Corla. Deputy, I'm going to answer your question in full. I think I have, and I think I did in the speech as well, but I will answer it again. But can I just say, I tell you what strikes me is this session was booked for several days. I think it was agreed on Tuesday, to talk about the fact that the country has just moved to level 3. And there are people for the last few days who have no job. There are people who've had to close down their businesses. And I would have imagined you'd be interested in a conversation in our Parliament about what we were doing about that and what supports were in place. And it is interesting to me that you have used your full 10 minutes to misrepresent an invented division between NEFID and government. As I said to you, Deputy, as I said in the statement, as I said to you again, after I spoke to the Chief Medical Officer, the Taoiseach and I spoke. After I spoke with the Chief Medical Officer, which was after NEFIT, which was the second time I spoke to him that day, which was the first time Level 5 had ever been mentioned to me or anyone else in government, I then spoke to the Taoiseach that evening as well.
Thank you very much, Minister. The time is up. I'm sorry. No, the Minister answered very clearly. He briefed the Taoiseach. You asked, did he brief? He said he did.